Hello and welcome to the Leaders Council podcast, the podcast for the people who run the country and the people who keep the country running. You join us on another bright day in a rather deserted city of Westminster in these current times, as once again we put the topic of leadership under the spotlight. I am your host, Scott Challoner, and I'm joined on today's programme by Mark Law. Mark is the Managing Director of Wilson Cooke Ltd, a digital marketing and advertising agency based in Manchester. Mark, welcome to the programme, and it's great to have you on the air with us today.
Great, thank you very much for having me. Looking forward to it.
Thanks ever so much, Mark, for taking the time to come on. It's certainly a lovely day for it, for sure. And the purpose of this discussion really is to understand your take on leadership. So if we dive straight in and look at that word leader in isolation just for a moment, what does that word actually mean to you?
For me, there's a large aspect of that is inspiration, the inspiration that you provide to the people around you, whether that's within business, outside of business, and alongside the kind of direction alignment. And alignment's quite an important word when it comes to trying to drive anything forward. Like I say, whether it's a business, whether it's a team, in whatever format you're looking at, to provide that alignment and that direction that you are taking a group of people on the journey going on, the end goal for that. Really, you've got to be driving towards something. And the team's got to be aligned towards what that goal is and that end goal comes from. And the leader is the one that really needs to be the one providing that.
You raise a very important point there, Mark, the need as a leader to be able to take people with you. And in order to do that, that takes a degree of people management, doesn't it? Specifically so when it comes to letting people know that you are safeguarding their interests as a leader, because if you do that and try and get onto a little bit of an equal footing with them, show some real humility as a leader, that's a surefire way to get people to really buy into the wider vision, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. And you talk about understanding their side, and empathy is a massive word, and it's more than a word. The meaning that comes from that, and what a leader needs to show is you really have to understand the person and the feeling that they've got and where they are in whatever journey they're looking at, and also what's going on within their lives. So being empathetic as a leader is massively important, because everybody's situation is very different, and even what we're going through now is a prime example of why empathy is so important. Because everybody's situation is different. There might be elements of similarity, but everything's relative to them. And one person's one thing that you think isn't that much of a big deal could be the most important thing to them. So to be able to provide the empathy, to be flexible within that, and really understand the people that it is that you're talking to, and what makes them tick, how they respond to different levels of communication, and ultimately what they're striving to achieve, as well as what you're potentially trying to achieve as a business or as an individual. Is trying to align these two parts together is really important, because that's how you really get people on board the journey that you're on and excited by that journey.
Adaptability in that sense is incredibly important, isn't it? Adaptability on the first hand of your leadership style, to ensure in any walk of life, really, never mind during a pandemic, that you can actually, of course, alter your style, if you will, just to match with different personalities and be able to manage those people effectively, because no one approach, as you say, is going to work for everyone. Adaptability, as we've said there, massive word in the current climate, of course, with COVID-19. Businesses, of course, had to adapt to changing guidelines, changing circumstances, changing ways of operating. But also, it's been a huge change at the people level, as you've rightly said there, Mark. How has it been for you in that sense, keeping the communication channels open and trying to sort of provide almost that reassurance that I'm sure a lot of people will have been looking for during this time? Because I can imagine there's been a lot of pressure to provide that when there's been so much uncertainty.
Yeah, absolutely. And it is unprecedented times, but also you draw on what you've tried to develop. And sort of from my perspective, what we've tried to build as a business is the flexibility and the agility that we need. As an agency, you need that. Anyway, as a leader, you need that. You rightly said there, you already have to have that, because generational changes, and you have to adapt your leadership to that. What younger people now come into workplace strive for is wildly different than what would have been the case 5 years ago, and even more so 10 years ago. So everybody wants something a little bit different. So you always have to be as flexible as possible to be able to adapt to that. And the other thing that we've been able to do, which is quite beneficial, is we were structured to be flexible, but also infrastructure to be able to work remotely and be less tied to our office. It's something that I implemented 3 or 4 years ago. Really was our journey to make us not office dependent, and I think that's something that a lot of people now, a lot of businesses are either ready for this or really being forced to be ready for this. And I think it will largely change the workplace of the future, and in a good way, in my perspective anyway. My personal opinion is that the old way of 9 till 5 and 9 till 5 and working in an office during those set times has always been relatively archaic anyway. So now it's really pushing forward that flexibility of where people can work, and then what we've also been able to do is then use that technology to stay connected. So whether that's with our morning check-in calls, or every Friday we'll have a quiz over Hangouts, and then we'll even individuals that are in a situation with us that are furloughed, we will still check in with everybody every couple of weeks. We'll have a team call every 2 weeks as a collective group, update everybody to let them know where we are as a business, how things are progressing. And obviously, but always being connected. So whether it's email, or whether it's Slack, or whether it's any other method that we've got available to us, really to allow individuals, whether they are still working or they are furloughed, they're still connected to the business. Still, I think that's really important. It's been really important through this, is not to forget about the people that are maybe not working, but also not forget about the people that are working. It's equally hard for everybody that is still within the business, that have potentially had to pick up the slack to a certain extent, and making sure that you're kind of aware of people's mental well-being through that and how they're handling it, and just knowing that communication is really important and can never really over-communicate. It's always about giving people as much information as you can, but also being honest and truthful through that as well, in the sense that everybody knows it's an unprecedented and difficult time. It's just really about keeping that line of communication open, and making sure that everybody knows that it's a two-way street. It's open the other way as well. If they need anything, whether that's their setup at home, whether that's anything they're going through, then you're always there for them, really, and just make sure everybody's. The big thing during this has been about making sure that everybody and all their families are safe, and that's obviously been massively important through this. Is that the safety of individuals is the number one priority, and fundamentally work follows that.
Exactly right. It's really forced the hand of business to innovate where it hasn't done before this period. And there are, as you say, going to be some real positives coming out of this, not just in the sense that business is modernising and adapting and is going to be more resilient coming out of this, but also the fact that there's a heightened focus on well-being and people, as you rightly said there, Mark, and we're hopefully going to carry that forward throughout this situation. We've talked an awful lot about your leadership style throughout this period, and I'm sure it's been the case prior to the pandemic as well, that you are a great communicator within the business world. Could you tell me perhaps, Mark, maybe some of the influences behind that way of doing things that you've developed?
Yeah, I mean, there's one of the big things. I mean, you're always an adapt as a leader, and this is another situation where you're in a new situation. I think what I've always been able to do, and something that I've always been an advocate of, is that resilience, to a certain extent, and everybody having a little bit of resilience is a good thing, and this will help not just businesses but also individuals within businesses develop that resilience, but also that ability to react to change. And I think that's massively important. I've always been an advocate of that. I've always tried to make sure that I am continuously trying to reimagine myself, I guess, to a certain extent, and certainly reimagine our business. So we're always trying to stay ahead. And within that, there's the self-development that goes into it. So I've always tried to develop myself and understand who I am. So the emotional intelligence that goes into understanding who you are, where your strengths lie, where your weaknesses lie, and embracing that to a certain extent. And what I then try to do is be authentic. Through my kind of journey with certainly within Wilson Cooke, I've learned a lot about myself through how to lead and how not to. And everybody makes mistakes, and I've made a ton of them and will continue to make them going forward. But one area that I did find is I went for a period where I tried to be the leader that I thought you should be. So you look at inspirational leaders out there, you read books and everything, and you think, right, well, that's the leader I want to be, so I'm going to try and mimic that. And what you ultimately find is that's often a mistake. What I instead try to do is take inspiration from different leaders or from different areas, and also from the kind of courses and leadership training that I've been on, and understand the authentic leader, and that's the big thing that I was able to really develop over the last number of years, is just to be yourself, and people just want to know the person. In the same way that you try and understand them as a person, it's also trying to make sure that they can understand you, and try not to be somebody that you're not. So the authenticity as an individual and as a leader is probably the one thing that I've kind of really developed and learned over the last number of years more than anything else, to be more effective, because then you're not trying to be someone you're not. You're not trying to position yourself based on the perception of what good leadership is, as opposed to just take the learnings, but also just be yourself, and show the person behind the leader. And that's really important. You don't have to be standoffish, or you don't have to have anything else going on, really. You can show vulnerability, and that's really important to get people to kind of get behind you and move forward as a team.
Yes, absolutely. That authenticity is massive. And for any individuals of the younger generation in particular who are tuning into this and listening to that, I think that is incredibly sound advice indeed. Speaking of future generations, Mark, or rather the future and the longer term, if we think about what the next year and beyond will hold for yourself and for Wilson Cooke Ltd as we move through this pandemic and hopefully beyond it to better times, what do you hope to really achieve during that period?
It's a really, really exciting time for us. We are at a point where, as a business, we are structured to really be able to go on an aggressive growth strategy, and that's what ultimately I'm looking to take us on, certainly over the next really 3 to 5 years, then mind the one. So in the next 12 to 18 months for us, it's how we're able to capitalise on the opportunities that come from this. Obviously, there's elements of uncertainty. I want us to be ready to kind of pounce on that uncertainty to a certain extent, really strong on what it is that we're going to offer, how we're going to position ourselves, make an investment in our team. That's the big thing as well, is being there to bring in the talent that's going to be available. So I suspect that off the back of this, there's going to be talent there to be had, and same from people that are different age ranges that come from that, really. So it's about making Wilson Cooke the agency where people want to go and work for us, in and around Manchester, and that real kind of investment in our team and our environment, that allows us to go and really kind of explode out of this, and grow at a rapid rate, really. And that's the exciting thing for me. I'm not looking at this in a defensive way. I'm looking really very much in an attacking sense of how do we really go, move forward, and take the opportunities that are going to be available.
It certainly seems like exciting times, Mark, and the business has certainly been innovative in previous years, hence why, of course, it's adapted so well, as you say, to the current situation with remote working. And I think as we start to understand what the new normal is really going to look like, I think it would actually be fantastic, given how informative it's been today, to actually have you back on the programme and just discuss how things are doing and maybe get an update on affairs at Wilson Cooke, for sure.
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah, I would love to come back. Yeah, I'd love to talk to you further.
It would be wonderful, Mark. I could certainly speak about it all afternoon, but unfortunately we are just about out of time today. But I have to say it's been a real pleasure having you on the programme, and as I say, a really informative and exciteful experience as well. And do take care and do stay safe with everything still going on in the meantime.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, it's been great. Really enjoyed it, and stay safe to everyone, really, and hopefully we'll all come out of this stronger.
Hopefully so. That was Mark Law, Managing Director of Wilson Cooke Ltd. Coming up next on the programme today, I'll be handing over to Jonathan White for his exclusive interview with England's 1966 Football World Cup hero, Sir Geoff Hurst. During his professional football career, Sir Geoff scored over 200 league goals for the likes of West Ham United and Stoke City. But most notably, he remains the only man to this day to have scored a hat-trick in the final of a World Cup competition, following his treble in England's 4-2 win over West Germany at the old Wembley Stadium 54 long years ago now. I hope you enjoy listening just as much as Jonathan enjoyed speaking with Sir Geoff, and that's coming up next.
We're now joined, though, by former England footballer and still the only man to score a hat-trick in a World Cup final, Sir Geoff Hurst. Thank you very much for coming on today.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Good afternoon.
And perhaps I should start and get it over and done with. I know you must be bored with it, and you've probably been asked 1,000 times. But when you got out for a duck playing for Essex, Geoff, what was going through your head at the time?
Well, of course, that's not one of the most asked questions I get. Oh, there are one or two people who are very familiar who do Google me, realise that I did score nothing for Essex. My only game for Essex first team when we played against Lancashire in Liverpool, a place called Egbert in Liverpool, many years ago, 1962, I think that was. So I didn't. I didn't really feel it at the time. It was lucky to be playing. I guess there were one or two injuries, but the problem that I had was really messing about between the two sports. That was very detrimental to me over that period of time, being stuck between the two sports.
And I think for those that don't know, there's another world that might exist where Sir Geoff Hurst was a first-class cricketer and not perhaps a footballer. But whether it's business or cricket or football, obviously the importance of leadership, it can't be understated, no matter what form that comes in. When you were at West Ham, Geoff, and when Ron Greenwood first came along, he made obviously some pretty radical changes. Was this a man that genuinely inspired confidence the first time you'd meet him?
Absolutely. I mean, he was simply a fantastic coach or teacher, if you like, of football. And the quite always mentioned when we talk about Ron Greenwood, Harry Redknapp, who was played under him and has been very successful as a player and the manager over many years. He's come across many coaches, of course, and managers during his time over years, I guess. He would still say that Ron Greenwood is the best coach he'd worked with. So you're very fortunate. I think you think you're lucky when you come across, if you have a great teacher at school and a great coach as we had in Ron Greenwood, and of course a great manager in Sir Alf Ramsey. So to come across people like that, of that calibre, can have a huge influence on your career, of course, and then your life. And that's quite purely the case.
Absolutely. And in those early days at West Ham, with a manager like Ron there, it's also important to have confidence with your other players. And of course, they become your friends. Who did you look at the time to inspire confidence in yourself? Was it Peters?
I think probably, I was very fortunate to play with the calibre of the players I did. Again, extremely fortunate to play with the captain of England and West Ham and Martin Peters, who was a fantastic player. And as far as Martin's concerned, I think sometimes he didn't quite get the recognition he deserved. What a wonderful player he was. In terms of inspiring confidence, I always probably say that the biggest influence for me, I guess, would be the captain, Bob Moore. Although he was only about 8 months older than me, he graduated through the system probably 3 or 4 years earlier. He played for England in 62, 4 years before the final when I played. And so he was more, looked upon him more as a senior player, if you like, not as a guy with the same age group as me. And I looked at how he trained, how he acted, how he behaved, and how he played. And so he would say, I would also say he was a big influence on me. One thing I would say about leadership, I do understand clearly in all walks of life, leadership is at the top, is absolutely vital for a business, a football team, in any walk of life to be successful. And it's quite evident. I was in the motor trade for a long time as well, selling car warranties to car dealerships. And you could almost tell when you walked into the business, many of the car dealerships, you could almost tell from the moment you walked in by initial reaction, people came and welcomed you, that the business was well run or conversely not well run at all. And so I understand the value and quality of leadership. And that's why I'm very fortunate to be involved in my career in those early days with two great leaders in Ron Greenwood and Alf Ramsey.
Absolutely. And since you've already brought him up, Geoff, I think it'd be remiss not to go a little bit further with that. But obviously, after at West Ham, your playing came to the attention of Sir Alf Ramsey. Now, there's a man I'm sure when you walked into a room, you knew who was in charge. When it came to managing that England team, what was his style like, Geoff? Well,
the first thing I say about Alf Ramsey, he's probably over my life the most powerful influence who had on me as a person. Naturally, it happens to an extent because he's got your whole career in his hand. Whether he picks you for England or he doesn't pick you, it can have a great impact on your career and, of course, your life. But in that era, I was involved for 6 or 7 years. It was quite clear who was the boss. He was quite very, very strict. Probably at a time, maybe overly strict, but at a time you probably wouldn't necessarily get away with it in today's football because it's changed dramatically in how you deal with players then and players now. But he was the most powerful man I came across, and very few people. And he was quite ruthless in getting people out who didn't want to be part of a group, part of a team. It is important that if you've got a group of people, and that's in any walk of life, they're all singing off the same hymn sheet, and you don't have anybody that's griping or moaning about the system. And if you've got people like that in your organisation, one thing I have learned, and I've taken it on in my life, my family, you've got somebody in a group that doesn't want to be part of it, you get them out. And Alf, I think, was quite ruthless of that in his staff. And I think that's one of the most serious things I think I've learnt over a long period of time.
And is there, do you think, a specific moment, I'm sure there's probably dozens, but is there a specific moment, if you could perhaps pick right now, that did show those qualities in Sir Alf so sharply?
Yes, I think for me, certainly, I think there are instances of players who you thought would be in the team or certainly in the squad, and surprisingly they were not. There was no necessary reason for it, but looking back, I do think perhaps they were people that Alf didn't think wanted to be part of a group. So that's for me. In terms of my personal view, I think that it looked prior to the World Cup that I was going to be playing in it. Only a few games before I was playing, and I played with Jimmy Greaves in a game against Yugoslavia only a couple of months before the final. And it looked at that stage as if I was going to be playing in the team. But in a couple of more friendly games before the final in Poland and Norway, I think, and Denmark, I played 2 of the 4 games, and I probably didn't quite replicate my form that I'd been showing at West Ham and in the early couple of games for England. And he left me out in the first game of the World Cup against Uruguay. He started off with Jimmy Greaves and Roger Hunt. So I had an impact of thinking at that stage I looked like I was going to play, and didn't start because of just a lack of form. I didn't play quite well enough to justify my position. And somewhat fortuitously, I only got back in the team because of a nasty gash to shin on Jimmy Greaves' leg.
And I think what you've said there, Jeff, actually does sum that up really well. And more than that, whilst it's important to have that someone in charge with those qualities, it's almost useless if there isn't a strong and unified team behind them. And there really must have been moments, Jeff, maybe there weren't, but let us know, in that 66 competition, the prolonged pressure on all of you, the weight of a nation, did it get to you?
Oh, not for me personally, no. I think, and I don't, not for me, not for a second. I think I was just happy to be involved in the squad initially. Not at all. You're not aware of the magnitude of the occasion, really, looking back out. So I never really felt, people talk about pressure a lot, and it's there, and players talk about it in life. I didn't really necessarily feel any great pressure during the time I was there. And what is also important to say about Alf Ramsey, the people he left behind that were left in the squad after he moved 1 or 2 players out, the squad were a bunch of very hard-nosed, professional, top-quality people. And that was, again, the leadership that Al showed. He got people in together that were very, very strong personally. And I think that was part of the success we had. We were I always describe our group as hard-nosed professionals. We have some great players, but overall they were great hard-nosed professional players. And great quality people who we've kept in contact with, over the years.
And Jeff, I've got to ask, and I'm not making this up, I've genuinely heard that people do ask you whether or not you realise there were people on the pitch at that moment. I imagine you were busy on something else.
Well, I did some theatre shows last year. They've gone fairly well, and we're going to do a series of theatre shows, in fact, starting this week, over the next 2 or 3 months. And at the end of the theatre shows, we have about 20 minutes where we allow the people in the audience to ask questions. And I won't mention both. They're too long to talk about both questions. The other one's a really stupid one. It's too long for me to tell you. It's absolutely ridiculous. But the other ridiculous question I get asked, did I realise there were people on the pitch? And of course I jokingly say, yes, I was just about to shoot to score the goal. And I looked round, put my foot on the ball, and looked round for a little while and said, oh dear, there are 6 or 7 people running on the pitch. So I've been asked that once at one of the theatre shows. So I make a joke about that and saying, yes, I put my foot on the ball and waited, just had a glance round, you know.
Maybe it does prove there are things such as stupid questions, really.
Oh, yeah, there certainly are. I've got another one which I won't bore you with. It's too long to tell you. I was in a Jersey, or Channel Line, Jersey or Guernsey, 2 or 3 years ago, and most stupid, irrelevant questions, absolutely nothing to do with football whatsoever, which was absolutely, but I can use that now because it is quite funny.
Well, maybe another time then, but we...
well, you want me? I can tell you if you want. You got time? I can tell you if you want.
Jeff, go on. Go. I think it would be silly if I said no at this point.
Okay, so I was doing at a dinner in the Channel Lines, 300 or 400 people, black tie dinner, guest of honour. On this occasion, I was speaking for about 20 minutes, then allowing questions from the audience at the end of the evening. And there was usual football questions, and then all of a sudden I had somebody at the back who asked a question. I didn't quite hear what he said. He didn't have the microphone with him, so I said, I didn't hear what he said. Can you please give this chap the microphone so I can hear clearly what he said? So the chap had the mic, and he said, when a turtle loses its shell, is it naked or is it homeless?
Right. What a question. What a question.
I think that would be definitely in the stupid category, wouldn't it? So we had a laugh about that.
You've got to have a patient of a saint, I think, sometimes to put up with things like that. But then again,
I found it amusing. I just found it amusing. In fact, some of the audience found it highly amusing as well. So it did make me laugh that day.
If you can put up with my questions, you can probably put up with anything. But there would have become a point, though, Jeff, I think you were a young man when obviously this happened, when you must have realised that teammates, began looking at you for leadership. Is that something that occurred to you, or did you just realise that by one way or the other, people actually begin to look up for you for inspiration?
Well, possibly. That's never really struck me until you've actually mentioned it now, quite frankly. It's a new question. Does anybody look up to me? I'm sure perhaps there are people who pay you compliments of fans of West Ham and Stoke, and of course England fans who I think probably it would be very immodest of me to suggest that I felt that somebody was looking to me for inspiration.
You don't have to, but I will.
It's okay for a third party to do it. Perhaps that may have been the case over the years. People look at you and maybe it has a helpful effect. But I do think you how you behave and set examples on and off the pitch, people must realise that has an influence. How you react and behave to situations on and off the field surely probably has an impact to younger players coming into the team latterly.
And with that, looking at football today, is there anybody that you think particularly on the field or the sidelines that strikes you as someone with those qualities that you could identify in a natural leader?
Well, current players, you mean?
Oh, players, managers, anybody that you look to today, really?
Well, I think some of the outstanding. I think the best example about a leader at the moment is Klopp at Liverpool. He has been absolutely fantastic to acquire the players and get them to. Their attitude is absolutely fantastic. They're great players, but there's more than just being good players in football. It is have good players with a fantastic attitude, and their willingness to work for each other and the team is absolutely outstanding. Hence these unbelievable results. There are, and the great players not always succeed as individuals, or probably even certainly as a team if you haven't got the right attitude alongside it. And they're probably, and that comes through the leadership. That's not just luck.
Absolutely.
That's absolute leadership. He'd be the best example, of course, in football terms today. Easily. And of course, but going back not that long ago, Alex Ferguson, who's just absolutely, you've got to take him as the first example, because Klopp's only done this over a period of time, a short period of time. But if you look at the 26, 27 years that Alex Ferguson did with Manchester United, and subsequently since he's gone, how they are not doing so well. He's the best example of management we've probably ever seen, and I don't think anybody will see the light of that kind of leadership again. It's absolutely astonishing.
And do you think, could you imagine Sir Alf or even Ron Greenwood managing teams today?
Yes, I think so. I think yes, no question at all. I think Ron Greenwood. Yeah, well, the answer, straightforward answer is yes.
Good answer.
The straightforward answer is yes. I can elaborate as much as you want, but the straight answer is absolutely categorically yes.
And with and I know if we could talk about this probably for the next hour or so, but I'm conscious of the time. Looking back through your playing career, perhaps especially your time for England, who was it that struck you more than anyone else on the pitch that displayed qualities of not just leadership but companionship and level-headedness that you think that have stuck with you all these years later?
Well, I think I was very fortunate, and I wouldn't pick any one player out. I think looking at that,
so many,
and that's why we were successful, because we had so many showing all those qualities that you just mentioned throughout the team. I think that was outstanding, and it's an opportunity to talk about all of them in that breath. And there was nobody, and going back from an earlier question for me, all hard-nosed professionals, good teammates, good socially, and that's why we kept in touch with each other on our golf days every year up until about 5 years ago. Of course, with the sadly dwindling numbers, we still got on. Our wives got on all together all those years later. It didn't just finish after '66. That reunion, that camaraderie, that team spirit. Getting on with each other lasted for a long time, and I wouldn't. When you put those questions and how you categorise those, I would pick every one of the 11 players who you put in that category that were like that. There was nobody else; they were all outstanding, and I think that was a big part. I can't stress how big a part that was, and I've said that many times, for the success of the team. We had some great players. We had some great players, of course. But without the attitude alongside that, going back to an earlier question, we wouldn't have been as ultimately as successful.
Exactly. Without that, the whole will never be greater than the sum of its parts. But with it,
yes, the word is team. The word is team.
Absolutely.
And I always use the word team when I talk. Sometimes together, everyone achieves more, and that's the same in any walk of life. That's fundamental.
And lastly, Jeff, looking, if you were to give advice, and whether this is in sport or business or indeed any other walk of life, what would you identify, if you can, as the key tenet that you can't go without in terms of leading a team, no matter what that team is?
Single-mindedness, dedication to the job. Thinking about that role, that job in leadership all the time. It's a huge part of your life. I don't think you can switch off when you're in business at the top level or sport at the top level. You may, have a couple of weeks holiday, but I'm even sure if these top managers and leaders in all walks of life are away on holiday on a beach somewhere warm, I'm sure they will not switch off for 2 weeks and completely not think about their role as the boss of an organisation. And I think you're completely focused. You're always thinking about things, thinking about improvements, and it's just dedication and tuning your life to being successful.
Excellent. Well, Jeff, on that point, thank you very much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Nice to have a talk about this and just go over the past and just refresh my own memory about the quality of the players I grew up with.
Excellent. Another time, it would be great to talk again.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you.
This has been the Leaders Council podcast. Thank you for celebrating excellence in leadership with us. I've been your host, Scott Challoner. Until next time, goodbye. Thank you for listening to our podcast. The views expressed within the podcast do not reflect the views of the Leaders Council of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, its parent company or subsidiaries, members of staff, or other guests of any other person therein associated.